Fox 5 and Hot 97 present Street Soldiers with Lisa Evers.
I'm so glad you're joining me for this episode of Street Soldiers on the new political fresh faces taking office in local positions as well as the halls of Congress. They come from different backgrounds and experiences, but they all have one thing in common. They represent the change that so many voters were seeking. The 2020 election is historic for many reasons, not the least of which is participation. Voter turnout was the highest of any election in U.S. history. The faces in the next congressional class picture look very different from their predecessors, says political strategist Basil Smikle.
I think it's a sea change in terms of diversity, and I'm glad to see that New York is one of many states that are leading the way in this.
No one represents that shift more than Congressman-elect Mondaire Jones. Jones and Richie Torres of the Bronx are the first two openly gay black men ever elected to Congress. A significant step forward, says Smikle.
Not only is it becoming diverse in terms of race and ethnicity, but just younger people with a lot of energy that can go into the halls of Congress and really fight for change.
It has been the most humbling, surreal experience of my life, but also a really exciting time.
Mondaire Jones represents the 17th Congressional District, which includes Rockland and Westchester counties. A practicing attorney, he says his background gives him the toughness to fight for his constituents.
I was raised by a young single mom who, even with the assistance of Section 8 housing and food stamps, had to work multiple jobs just to put food on the table for us.
There's definitely a new energy, but will they be able to make real change at such a challenging time? Let's find out what our panel has to say. Let me introduce them to you right now. Zohran Mamdani. Zohran, I got it?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Mamdani. All right, great. We got it. We'll get used to that name. Everyone will be saying it like that. All right. He is a Democrat from the 36th District in Astoria. He is the first South Asian man elected to the New York State Assembly, the first South Asian man from New York City. Zohran Mamdani, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Also joining us is Jessica Gonzalez Rojas. She's the first Latina, first person of color to represent Jackson Heights and other neighborhoods in Assembly District 34. Jessica, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much. Yours is much easier because hablo español, so it's main language in my neighborhood. Also joining us is Khalil Musa Anderson. He's the youngest black man at the age of, I think, 24, Khalil? 24, ever elected to the New York State Assembly. He represents District 31 in Queens, which includes Far Rockaway and many other neighborhoods. Khalil, thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa, so much for having us today.
Yeah, it's really exciting. Zohran, in terms of running for office, what brought you to that point? How did you wake up one day and go, I want to run for office, or this is really messed up, I can do better than them? Tell us a little bit about how you got involved.
So before I was a candidate for office, I was a foreclosure prevention housing counselor, which means I would work with low to moderate income homeowners of color, typically immigrant homeowners across the borough of Queens. And so it was my job to work with people whose lives had been broken into a million pieces, whether it be sudden job loss, an unexpected medical emergency, something happening in their family, and try to piece things back together. And on the side of that, I was an active member in the Democratic Socialists of America's Queens branch. And so one day at a meeting that we were having, a good friend of mine pulled me aside and asked me to run for this seat. And I took a couple of weeks to think it over. And the reason that I decided to do so is that the potential of being a legislator is to craft and push and then enact laws that ensure that people's lives are never broken in the first place. And that's what I'm really excited to go to Albany to do.
Oh, and we're going to talk about what some of your goals are in a minute too. Let me bring in our other panelists. Jessica Gonzalez Rojas, you're the first Latina from a district that has a very large Latin population. What made you decide to get involved?
Well, representation really matters. This district is one of the most diverse districts, not just in the city or state, but possibly the world. We are 60% Latinx. We're 27% Asian and mostly South Asian, and we hail from countries like Bangladesh and Ecuador and Peru and Nepal. And this district has never been represented by neither a person of color or really a progressive person of color. So it's not just about identity, and it's also about values. So as someone who's also come from this as an activist. I've been an activist for over 2 decades on everything from disability justice to reproductive justice to immigration to LGBTQ liberation. I understand firsthand the issues that our communities face and the fact that our representatives were not representing the needs of our community. And I believe that those most impacted by the horrific policies that we often see are often those that have the solutions. So as someone who comes from the community, someone who's worked on the grassroots level in our community, I felt that, and quite honestly, like Zohran said, people have come to me to ask and say, why don't you run? But I felt like I can actually be the convener of the stories and the solutions that our communities most need and most deserve.
So very personal for you.
Totally.
Khalil Musa Anderson, tell us what made you decide to get involved and run for office.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, for me, I've been an activist and organizer in the Rockaways for a little over 10 years, just being engaged and involved in the political discourse that's been happening in our neighborhoods, the issues that really matter to the residents that live in and around the Rockaways. I got my start as an organizer with the Rockaway Youth Task Force, and I've been organizing with groups all throughout Queens thereafter, just because of the work that we were doing, fighting to make sure that we had police reform, fighting to make sure that there was adequate access to food in a federally labeled food desert, and making sure that transit justice was on the top of the minds of our elected leaders and people who are organizing in the neighborhood are the things that I've been super passionate about, and I'm hoping to bring that same energy to the legislature, to bring a voice to the legislature that's been lacking for so long, that really prioritizes the hyperlocal, really prioritizes the needs of everyday average folk who are just trying to get by and want to do better in that space. And so, you know, I decided to run for the legislature because I'm a little crazy. I think that everyone should live in decent housing, and that's
crazy too. We think that's pretty basic.
Right. I think that everyone should have access to fresh. Absolutely, and I strongly believe that folks should have access to transit so they can get from point A to point B. And these are the things that I've been consistent with, and we're hoping to bring it to the legislature. And I have the additional responsibility to make sure that we have a youth focus. Being the youngest member of the legislature, we have to make sure we prioritize young people because we are often at the epicenter of everything, but left out of these discussions.
So which issues were most important? We'll find out when we come back. Jessica, in terms of the issues that you really found resonating with voters, especially first-time voters, especially new voters who just turned 19 or 20, whatever, give us your top 3.
So as someone who's done immigrant advocacy my entire life, I'm a daughter of an immigrant. My mom's Puerto Rican. My dad's from Paraguay. He came to this country at 16. I know the struggles that our immigrant community faces. This district is 62% immigrant, and being at the forefront of the issues that the immigrant community is facing, a lot of it are federal issues, but it's become a local issue because navigating the school system, navigating housing, navigating jobs and opportunities right here in the district has been a tremendous challenge due to the immigration status. So I have to say those are the issues that are top of mind for us, making sure that in any policies that we advance is that we're thinking about who does this benefit? Does this benefit a person who does not speak English? Does this benefit a person who may be undocumented right now? Does this benefit someone who's transgender and their gender identity doesn't reflect that on their ID, right? It's really about centering the needs of those who have been most marginalized so that every single person can benefit. And that comes out in every issue. When we talk about housing, when we talk about education, when we talk about jobs, when we talk about any issue that impacts our lives, I come to the work with that framework. And that's why I feel really excited to be an activist in the state assembly, because I'm centering those lived experiences. And I want to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to thrive, no matter their gender identity, their sexual orientation, their immigration status, what language they speak, who they love. All those things are really centered in my advocacy.
No, that's fantastic. Zohran, in terms of your district, you have tremendous diversity there as well. So are there issues that basically were cutting across all the various different demographic groups?
Absolutely, Lisa. The first and foremost, the issue that is kind of the underpinning of the crisis here in Astoria is about housing. Just before this, I was actually at a press conference at an apartment building here in Astoria where the landlord had shut off heat and hot water for the 16 different units across the entirety of the building. And those tenants are almost all immigrants. The vast majority of them are Bangladeshi. So as Jessica was saying, there are multiple layers of the ways in which people experience these crises. It's not a coincidence that oftentimes it is the most marginalized in our society that experience the most harassment from these kinds of entities and landlords. So, when I would be out there talking to voters on subway platforms, in parks, at their doors, and then post-COVID over the phone, on text, we would always find the conversation going back to housing, because we're in the midst of a global pandemic, an unprecedented one, where health officials are saying the safest thing to do is stay home.
Right.
And yet we have not canceled rent. And yet we do not have a foolproof eviction moratorium. We are not incentivizing people to follow these guidelines. And we would find again and again and again, this is not a crisis that began in the middle of March. This is a crisis that has existed for many, many years. And here in Astoria, just like in Jackson Heights, we are experiencing the throes of gentrification. We are seeing there is a financial incentive for landlords to kick out longstanding tenants, to bring in new ones that can pay higher rents. And we need to fight back against that by passing these kinds of legislation and by ensuring that we've passed good cause eviction, which will create universal rent control across New York State.
Khalil, in terms of the issues among your constituents now, what are you seeing are the top ones? You mentioned transportation, which of course in Southeast Queens is critical, but what are the ones that really you think motivated people to come out?
Yeah, so I think separate from transit, as you mentioned, I would say two additional issues that are vitally important to folks who live in the 31st or around the 31st certainly would be food access. We saw that during COVID-19, a lot of people could not access food as they normally would. Seniors and folks who rely on foods that are cultural, central to their culture, and general foods that they need to go to, fresh produce as well. These are things that folks struggle to access, during the storm, and it's something that's been exacerbated, during COVID. And we see an additional increase of those issues, and we want to tackle those from a holistic sense. I think that's one issue, and then secondly, housing. Housing is a big issue in the 31st. We have folks. It's an interesting district where there's a divide of the amount of homeowners versus tenants, but nonetheless, we have a lot of folks who are displaced, a lot of folks who have fallen behind in their rent, and a lot of also small businesses, and this kind of ties into some of the stuff we're going to be talking about in the legislature, who couldn't afford to stay in business. These small, folks who own businesses in the neighborhood and are also homeowners in the community, or renters in the community, just could not afford. And so, that's going to be a big piece that we're going to be focused on in the legislature come January is how do we recover?
Khalil, in terms of what you hope to accomplish realistically, I mean, of course we want, healthcare for people, decent housing, all these things. As we all know, unfortunately, these things take time and can take much more time. How do you see, how are you adjusting your expectations, dealing with the political process, and, what are you hoping to really accomplish in this first term?
So, what I think? I think that we shouldn't be fearful of these political systems that put hindrances on our ambition and vision for our neighborhoods. We know that our communities and our neighborhoods are in dire needs now more than ever, but were prior. And we were elected, and I'll speak, I'm speaking, of course, for the folks who are here, but also myself, because we really, really know that our communities need a stronger voice in Albany. People resonated with our message. And so that doesn't affect what my platforms and strategies and things what we want to get accomplished next year in our first term in office. And that means fighting to make sure that we get relief for small homeowners and renters, permanent relief, not just to carry us outside of the COVID-19 crisis, but looking at ways of permanently making sure that we're keeping folks who are small homeowners in their homes.
Zoran, as Khalil was talking about, economics, there's these issues, but by all prognostications, the economic future of New York may get much worse before it actually gets better. How is that going to change what you're able to accomplish in this first term? Is just basically keeping the ship afloat, or what do you see maybe, as Governor Cuomo has said in the past, let's reimagine it better? Where are you with that in terms of your personal goals that you want to accomplish in these first 2 years?
Yeah, I would say that there is a pressure within both political discourse as well as within discussions with politicians where they talk about wanting things to just go back to normal. But as each of the three of us have spoken about, normal was already killing people. Normal was already a crisis. This is not an opportunity to go back to normal. Governor Cuomo and I disagree on many, many things, but when he talks about reimagining a new world, I fully agree. We have to reimagine it better. Where we disagree is his better is more austerity, more privatized control, more privatized ownership, and my better, and the better of so many others, including those on this call, is one where every single New Yorker has a dignified life.
Jessica, for you, what do you hope to accomplish, given that these challenges are so very, very difficult right now because of the pandemic?
I believe in centering the lived experiences of those most impacted. So when I think about my neighbor that's struggling to pay rent, that is struggling to put food on their table, that is struggling because of juggling homeschooling and a job that is inflexible, right? That's the voice that I'm bringing to Albany. And like my brother said, we have to fight to ensure that we're getting the investment and resource that we need to fully fund our schools, to pass finally the New York Health Act, to cancel rent, to fund excluded workers, the people on the front lines that kept the city running this entire pandemic has been mostly immigrant undocumented people who are on the front lines of many of the industries that have kept the city going. And you know how much relief they got? Nothing. So we have a more responsibility to invest and serve those folks who have been on the front lines. And it's gonna take, what Zohran said, it's gonna take taxing the rich. Do you know, we have 120 billionaires with a B in New York, and they have gotten $77 billion richer during the pandemic. So there is money. There is money in the state, and many of them have actually said that they're willing to make that investment. They're not going to flee the state or the city. This city is set up to make them successful. So they need to pay their fair share to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to live, work, and thrive in New York State.
Do you really and truly, honestly believe you're going to be able to make a difference with these immense challenges ahead?
We have no choice, right? The voters that elected us gave us a mandate to fight. And at the least, that's what we should be doing, is fighting. We should not allow these discussions to go without our opinions. We should not allow these discussions to go on without our voice at that table. So we have that mandate, and we have to fight. We cannot allow these discussions to continue to go over the heads of the millions of working class New Yorkers who live in this city and across this state without having a voice in that room.
And who are paying taxes as well, not billions of dollars of taxes, but they're paying taxes as well. Zohran, do you think you're going to be able to do it?
I am excited, I am confident, and I'm also, aware of the challenges that we will face. But we are not here for an intellectual discussion. We're not here to build a brand. We're here to bring results back to the people of our district.
Right.
And if we can't do that, then we shouldn't be in office.
And are you really convinced that this new energy that we're seeing and that we're feeling, that's very real, nationally as well, is going to help you put you over the finish line?
When I was knocking on doors, when we were able to knock on doors, there was a woman who opened her door, a Latina abuela, a grandmother, and, all we needed was her to sign the petition, but she said, come in. And she sat me down, and she, of course, offered me food, you know how we do. And she said, hold on, I'll be right back. So she went in her room, and she came back, and she put a blazer on. And what it told me is that she felt like I was important. And what it told me that she felt like I was ready to listen. And what it told me is that she had something to say. And that's who I'm holding. That's why I ran. That's why I'm doing this work. And that's who I'm accountable to. So I will fight like hell. I agree with what everyone said, right? We have to hold a vision, We know we're not going to get everything done that we need to, but if we can move the needle, if we can change hearts and minds, if we can shift the dialogue as what's possible, I'm happy. We've done our job and we're ready to fight.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Street Soldiers. You can find this show and all our episodes on our Fox 5 NY YouTube page and watch it again or share it. Remember, use your mind. It's your best weapon. I hope it's your only weapon. I'm Lisa Evers. Let's push for peace, love, and justice for all.